I think that's kind of the cool thing about all of this, that, in DeFi, we like composability, especially when composability leads to creating something greater than the sum of its parts. You get this emergent new instrument that adds to the ecosystem in a way that
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of Ante Up, where we walk through protocols and break down how they work. I'm a bit Willish from Ante, and today we're going to be talking about a new protocol called MetaStreet. MetaStreet is doing something that we think is pretty interesting at the intersection of DeFi and NFTs. And today we have with us David, Ivan, Nato, and Connor from the MetaStreet team. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us.
So how today's going to work is we're going to go through a kind of a high-level overview of how MetaStreet works, cover some of the questions people might have about mechanics, and talk about our partnership and how TESS enables creation of new products. Before we get started, though, a quick message from our lawyers. This is financial advice, blah, blah, blah. All right, now let's get into it. David, you want to talk about what is MetaStreet and why is it important?
Absolutely. I can give a very high level overview, which is essentially MetaStreet is a liquidity routing and scaling protocol for the NFT credit markets, as in loans that goes against NFTs, and how do you scale those assets? Because the industry is growing, it's a nascent industry, but the way these loans are structured is that they're a bilateral contract. So you collateralize one asset for the other, it's fixed term, fixed duration, as it eventually expires. So this is kind of hard to scale because it's peer-to-peer. The vaults sit behind one layer behind these existing NFT lending protocols, which are effectively what we call DO, which is direct origination platforms. And we're trying to facilitate a diversified credit exposure to all these assets. And the capital allocator or depositor inside MetaStreet Vault essentially creates a bucket where you can accept different notes that are algorithmically priced. So the real innovation is that it prices the loan in of itself, which up to now has not, there has been much, let alone more than 5 transactions for the actual promissory notes that are minted on these platforms. But yeah, it's essentially creating this perpetual market liquidity that serves for the active originator. So the biggest goal is that you can actually control the interest rates from this position, which is essentially further down the capital stack from the lowest debt layer, where you're seeing what is creditworthy and what is not. And that is how you kind of scale these kind of capital markets, is essentially being able to quickly risk allocate. And the goal is eventually you'll have optimal capital efficiency, and this metaverse that we're seeing develop, which is really good at the economy behind it. It's going to help scale that GDP because you can expand the credit markets.
Got it. So basically you've got users interacting with a vault and users deposit money in. The vault then purchases NFT loans and then pays out interest from the returns of those notes. So there are 2, I think, tranches is what you call them, that people can deposit in. What's the difference between those 2 tranches?
Yeah, effectively, it's more like equity and debt, really. We just call it that just for simplicity's sake. But effectively, the senior had just a flat risk, and they don't want to deal with the volatility that happens with the underlying asset. So if you're imagining, I guess, the price of the collateral can dip into the principal that's being provided. And the junior takes that first exposure. So essentially, they're getting a lot of the benefits of the rest of the yield, but they also take first hit. And the senior has a flat rate, so it's more like floating and fixed, where the fixed rate it's pretty much what's going to be paid out, I guess, underneath the junior. Is that it's a more reliable source of income with less likelihood of it getting wiped out in the event of a worst case event, which is kind of why we're working with Ante to develop this product. And there's a big, I guess, risk difference in terms of the position that you're allocating your risk towards or capital towards. So high level, senior is fixed, and it's second on the waterfall. And the first is floating, and it gets the rest of the pie, much like equity.
Got it. Okay. So then I guess if a user is asking then what kind of risk am I taking on if I'm putting my money into the vault for the junior tranche, then they have potentially the ability to suffer up to the complete loss of their principal. Totally. And then
I was just going to jump in there. So there's already a big buffer with the vaults that we have. So right now it's algorithmically determined by how far has the collateral dropped before the the loan is underwater. That's already being buffered. So, for example, if you did like a 30% LTV loan, for example, if you have a 100K asset and you're getting 30K for it, the underlying asset has to drop down 70% already. So it's after that buffer is kind of extinguished that you actually have a loss of the junior. This matters a lot still because they are the first exposure, and one bad day of a bad loan can affect multiple iterations of the same loan. So if you did 5 months of it doing well, one bad day could affect your results. So there is annualized yields that you have to think about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the risk is already buffered, but this is even more buffering for the junior. The junior just takes less.
Got it. Makes sense. So then junior tranche solvency is kind of one indicator of overall vault health then?
Yeah, absolutely. So one that, if the protocol had a mind, and if it was thinking, it would be thinking I have to protect the senior. It's not thinking I have to protect the junior. The juniors are actually risk takers, and they're more willing to get a higher yield, but they understand that they're first in the pecking order.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Which I guess brings us to the Ante test that you guys have written for the junior tranche solvency. So for those of you new to the show, Ante is a protocol that allows anyone to make on-chain commitments and stake crypto behind it to provide guarantees around commitments such as protocol solvency, multi-sig balances, stuff like that. And the idea is that you can make these credible commitments and programmatically pay out in the case of specific code failures. So we worked with the MetaStreet team to create an anti-test for the junior tranche solvency in the MetaStreet vaults. Evan, you want to talk through what this test does?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So yeah, it's a pretty simple test, just under 50 lines there, as you can see. The first half of it is really just an abridged interface into our vaults, just defining the main getter that we need to implement the test. And the way the test works is it's really just looking at the current value of the junior tranche and ensuring that it's greater than any of the pending redemptions that are scheduled in the junior tranche. And that's essentially the condition you'd have to check to see if that particular tranche is solvent. So if the value of that tranche was less than basically depositors that are in schedule to get redeemed, then it would be insolvent. But if it's greater or equal to it, then it's solvent. So, at the end of the day, it's just like a one-line check, provided that the getter is there, and that's the test in a nutshell. So inside check test passes, it's grabbing that realized value, pending redemptions, and doing that comparison. And based on this alone, you can have this Boolean check that the tranche is solvent at any given time. And then that works with the rest of Ante's protocol to either stake or challenge that particular test.
Got it. As a quick aside, the realized value then is, so this is more of is it almost more testing illiquid rather than insolvent?
It's really solvency in the sense that if the realized value is less than the pending redemptions, then there is no hope for having sufficient liquidity to basically redeem anybody scheduled for a redemption when a loan comes due. So it's really one in both, solvency and illiquidity. It is possible for the condition to reverse eventually. So if there is, for example, if the vault purchases another loan that generates returns for the junior tranche that brings the realized value back up, then the junior tranche can be, as we call, resuscitated, and it's solvent again. So it's not a permanent condition, but it is, it's a good health factor, and it's a good one you can build a market around, which, is what Ante enables in this case.
Got it. So with the anti-test in this case, if the junior tranche is ever insolvent and anyone checks the anti-test, they would get paid out from the staker pool. And so if we look at the current anti-test, looks like we've got 25 ETH staked in there. So if the junior tranche were to be insolvent at this point in time, someone could challenge the test and then claim their portion of that 25 ETH then. What are some interesting new things that we think this opens up for users of MetaStreet in terms of creating a market for them to kind of price their risk?
Well, it's definitely a compelling, I'd say, like emergent instrument for people that are worried about potential default. So if you're a depositor in the protocol, and you are a junior tranche depositor because you're looking for that higher yield, but also taking on some of the higher risk, you can actually hedge your position by being a challenger in Ante on this particular test. And actually, the cool thing about it as well is because the challenge decays in Ante, you can actually time this such that, if you did think there was going to be a big market event that affected a lot of loans that would ultimately impair the junior tranche, you could actually take a position selectively in time to hedge against that for however much you want to stake. And, it'll decay in the Ante protocol if it doesn't come to fruition. But if it does, then you've essentially purchased insurance on your own deposit. So you can hedge your position. And I think that's kind of the cool thing about all of this, that through, in DeFi, we like composability, especially when composability leads to creating something greater than the sum of its parts. And in the case of this, it's like in Ante, it's just testing a protocol invariant and creating a market around it, like fundamentally. But when you pair that with a DeFi protocol that has an invariant that's related to its financial health, you get this like emergent new instrument that kind of adds to the ecosystem in a way that wasn't like intended initially, but it's useful to both projects.
Yeah, and I guess you could also imagine not just individual users challenging a pool to get downside protection against specific failure cases, but you could also have products built around programmatically challenging something based off of the trust score or something like that, in a way that then allows you to take the appropriate amount of risk that you've determined that you want to do. So.
Right.
Another question that we've seen a lot of questions around is, what is estimated value versus realized value? And what's the relationship between them?
Yeah, so basically both tranches in a MetaStreet vault, they have their own values. They have their own LP tokens, and therefore they've got their own share prices. And these can evolve over time in different directions, just depending on loan activity. Because as we talked about before, the junior tranche absorbs most, if not all, the loan defaults. So over time, the tranche are kind of evolving. Their values are evolving with loan repayments and potentially with defaults. So basically, realized value is just the face value of the assets on the balance sheet of the tranche. So the face value includes like cash, and it includes the price that loans were purchased at. It doesn't have any of the prospective returns from those loans. It's just, like I said, the face value of it. That's really the kind of the conservative estimate of what this balance sheet is valued at. And it's proportional for the two tranches. So if the senior tranche is 75%, the junior tranche is 25%, then the realized value will be proportional there for each. The estimated value is it's just the realized value plus a proration of returns from loans. So it's basically estimating what the assets are worth on the balance sheet as it's getting closer to maturity for like all the different loans that are held on the balance sheet. So yeah, that's realized value versus estimated value in a nutshell. Realized value is the face value, estimated value is sort of a optimistic estimate of the loans that are maturing on the balance sheet.
Got it. Okay. So then the estimated value is then always greater than or equal to the realized value.
Yeah, the realized value is really just like lagging behind the estimated value. The realized value, if a loan gets repaid, it'll get augmented by the returns of that loan, whereas the estimated value is like continuously prorating it in there. So yeah, you'll basically see the realized value kind of jump up in time with loan repayments. In the case of a loan default, it'll affect both of them simultaneously. So both the estimated value and the realized value will reflect, if a loan defaults, that the value is, in the case of the junior tranche in particular, if the value gets impaired by that loss. That's essentially it, like in a nutshell. And then it kind of factors into how we price the shares for these tranches. If you're a depositor, when you deposit, you're getting a share price based on the estimated value. And when you withdraw, it's based on the realized value. And that's really for the simple reason of Well, there's two reasons really. One of them is that as a depositor, you want to be exposed to all of the maturing loans on the balance sheet. So you want to kind of see the appreciation from all of it as you put your capital at risk. But at the same time, you don't want to be able to capture those returns until they've actually been repaid, which is why the redemptions are based on the realized value.
Got it. Okay.
I would like to also add that this kind of vault structure for Ante is quite complementary to the strategies of the capital depositor, especially one that wants to take on risk. For example, whatever strategies they run, they deposit capital. Yes, you can take back capital within an earlier period if there's availability, but if that availability runs out, for example, there's like a expected change in underlying collateral, and there's like a small bank run with regards to like the 10% get depleted. That's the maximum amount in which you can withdraw before the withdrawal stop, assuming that the loan isn't being used. They can still maintain that position through the expiry. So the durations in the MetaStreet vaults can be long. Like hypothetically, they can get up to 90 days. That's in assuming that all the loans were to hit that range. And this is a perfect way to enter into like a hedge position when you're not feeling comfortable with the market or something. And this is a interesting way to play that out. And especially as like in DeFi where you're getting a lot more complicated with back leverage. For example, using say like a Fuse pool or like the many others coming out, Fiat DAO, Gearbox, and stuff like that, where there's a lot more leverage than you actually see. That's when you have a larger and larger need to have default protection, which is essentially like a credit default swap, but for in a decentralized way. So I just wanted to add that flair with regards to how this could be an effective tool that goes beyond the purposes of just trust.
Nice. So I want to talk a little bit about withdrawals. So the vault using deposited funds to purchase these loan notes. So what happens if there is kind of like a bank run type scenarios and a bunch of people want to withdraw their funds in a fairly short period of time?
In general, the way redemptions and withdrawals work is redemptions are first going to be serviced out of any available cash. So if the vault is, let's say, at 80% utilization, meaning 80% of the cash is tied up in loans on the balance sheet and 20% is actually sitting in cash, the redemptions would be serviced out of there first. If all that cash is gone because the vault has pretty high utilization or there's been withdrawals, then essentially people get a promise of the redemption share price that they're quoted, and the vault will just schedule them. And essentially as loans mature, those proceeds will be first used to service redemptions. And it'll be serviced in the order of the senior tranche followed by the junior tranche. So senior tranche redemptions always take precedence over the junior tranche. Yeah, I guess the other thing I'll add is that it really is like a full reserve structure. There's no explicit reserve ratios on the balance sheet or anything like that. Everything is backed one-to-one with the loan. And in the case that, there isn't like cash, even after the loans mature, like people will still be scheduled. And as new loans are purchased from future deposits, the redemption queue will always be honored. So if new cash comes in, it'll service redeemers. And if new loans are purchased that mature, like that'll also service redemption. So that's how it works at a high level.
Awesome. Yeah, it all works out in the end, hopefully. Getting off of MetaStreet then, I guess, what are you guys most excited about for the rest of the year?
Hopefully a recovery in the economy and a stable dollar. It's one big goal. I think a lot of it, I'm not sure if you guys ever been to conferences, but there's usually a lot of tourists. And one of the great things in a bear market, as corny as it was, is that you actually do have the believers and the builders that stay along and end up building things that you can only dream about. In 2017, I never thought DeFi was even possible as a concept, but eventually the magic money thing did happen. You can actually have like trustless swaps and stuff like that. I can only imagine what's going to happen in 3 or 4 years when the metaverse actually does develop, where we're going to see the next billion users being onboarded with actual fun and exciting and usable asset, NFTs especially, being a great bridge for the retail audience. So excited for what's coming next. And given the amount of investments that's happened over the last few months, or last few years really, there's bound to be something good coming up. And I'm pretty excited to see what the economy is going to look like.
Awesome. Yeah.
Especially in the gaming side especially. I'm very excited about that.
Next billion users, wow.
Next billion bots probably first, but then there'll be a billion users. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to add, we always have a technical backlog of like features to add to our vaults, new asset types to support, new debt-like instruments, things like supporting batches of collateral, and so there's plenty for us to work on, and building during the bear market has always got a few fewer distractions, which is nice from a development perspective.
Totally feel you there. I guess this is where the projects that are building for the future of the metaverse, helping build those layers of infrastructure that everything else is going to be built on top of. That's where we get to really get building.
Yeah, and I think the foundations of whenever I think of metaverse, I really don't think of anything beyond the currency, economy, and money, because that's why you're playing WoW, or that's why you're playing these other games. And we're just building the very first layer. Like, it's really the bottom layer of the capital stack. But once you start getting into like the derivatives off of like video game assets, like imagine you're doing like a swap between an Axie and a horse breeding loan, something crazy like that. That's when you get real speculation and more exciting. Well, hopefully that's the next bull market too. So we're just seeing the very beginning, and all these other structured assets and also asset onboarding, like utility-based assets. Once those start converging, hopefully we see a Cambrian explosion of derivatives and games coming about.
Awesome. Well, David and Ivan, it's been an absolute pleasure having you here with us today. MetaStreet, earning interest on NFT-backed loans and helping increase the GDP of the metaverse. You can check them out at metastreet.xyz. They are on Ethereum mainnet, and you can follow them on Twitter at MetaStreetXYZ or discord.gg/MetaStreet.
Thanks a lot for having us.
Yeah. How do we join Ante?
Ante.xyz. You can go to discord.ante.xyz to join our Discord. You can follow us on Twitter at antifinance. And super easy to write an anti-test for any protocol. As you saw the anti-test earlier, 50 lines of code is sufficient to test anything. So yeah, help us make DeFi safer, safe.